welcome to the show, Tom. Very happy to have you.
Hello, Alan. Thanks so much for having me.
You've been passionate about aviation, and it's led you to find business opportunities, which is fantastic. I talk a lot about, and I get a lot of questions about, hey, what's the industry that I should start a business in? And my first non-real estate related business was actually pest control. And I love that industry. I'm very passionate about the industry, but I'm not really passionate about bugs and critters and stuff like that. So it's a little different than your take. Tell me about how you got interested in aviation and how you parlayed that into a business slash career.
Yeah, for sure. When I first got interested in private aviation, probably like many, people of my age, when I first saw Top Gun in the movies, and I was like,
Oh, yeah.
I want to be a fighter pilot, man. And so I told my mom. She took me out to the local airport. I started doing flying private lessons,
Mm-hmm.
and within 3 lessons, I quit. I couldn't take it. I got headaches every time I went up there, and it just wasn't enjoyable for me. I thought I wanted to be a fire pilot, but I couldn't. I couldn't handle it. So I kind of put that on the back burner for a little while. And my main career when I first got out of college was actually a youth pastor. I was really passionate about
Hmm.
my faith, and I had a good experience growing up in my Catholic church locally. And so I wanted to be a youth pastor, and I did that
Mm-hmm.
for about a decade. And then I turned my attention to helping a local music school grow with the marketing and sales as a manager there. And at that point in time, my wife and I, we had 5 kids, and we were just sick and tired of, living paycheck to paycheck. Even though we were passionate about something, we still needed to pay the bills. And we always felt like there was something more for us out there. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where I saw an ad online for sales. I don't even think it said jets. I think it just said high luxury items. I walked into the office, found out it was at the airport, and I found out that it was selling private jets. And I guess they liked my smile. They took a chance on a guy that didn't have much aviation experience, and the rest is kind of history, and just kind of rekindled my love for aviation and flying. And when you fast forward a couple of years, I successfully did complete my pilot's license, so I am an actual pilot now, and I own my
Mm.
own little 172 plane. And aviation's been my life for the last couple of years.
That's cool. So, what year was that you walked into that new opportunity?
Yeah, well, funny enough, it was during COVID.
Hmm.
I had put my 2 weeks notice in at the music school, and then 2 weeks later, the everything got shut down. And the agency called me and they said, "Hey, dude, just so you know, we can't hire you right now. You're gonna have to wait. We don't know how long." And so
Hmm.
I was out of a job, and I just kind of had to sit there for 6 weeks, which I ended up doing another side project that I was working on at the time, and made stuff happen. And then 6 weeks later, they brought me in.
That's an interesting dynamic, right? Like you were really passionate about being a youth pastor, you're passionate about the music store. When if someone were to ask you, "Hey Tom, you have to choose passion or money, which do you choose?"
Well, it's kind of funny because my wife and I have had that conversation. And what I have found is when the stars align, it's having that enough finances so that we can also not just participate in our passions, but participate on a higher level. And so
Hmm.
now I can pour in. I'm still involved in the church as a volunteer youth minister, because my kids are middle school, high school age. My wife and I still play music at church, but now I'm able to pour into these kids from a different place. I'm not pouring into them from a place of want and scarcity, which has its own merits. From a faith perspective, there's the humility component of it. But now I can pour into these kids and into my passions from a place of abundance. And I think there's something to that.
I'm a father. I have three um, wonderful children. 90% of the time, they're wonderful. Um, I have a 10-year-old boy, Maddox. I have a 8-year-old boy, Jackson, and a 4-year-old daughter, Olivia. And I don't talk about them much on this show, on my social platforms, a little bit here and there. And I think people get confused with how much time and how much of my life they are. Um, and and right now they're they're at really pivotal ages. I think kids are, no matter what age they're at. Um, I think it's really cool that you worked with youth because the world's such a crazy place right now. And I think it's kind of always been, but with the internet, with social media, with access to like crazy information, with COVID happening and all these moving parts, um, being a father is much more important to me than being an entrepreneur. I believe that I'm going to be a father forever, right? I believe, I have a strong faith in God. I believe that it's going to last into perpetuity. Whereas, my career as an entrepreneur, as an investor, is more of a short term gig. So I think it's really cool that you've had this opportunity um, to spend some time with the youth, and they're so impressionable. And one thing that I've learned, kind of, and this goes back to the question about passion versus money, it's like you're you, you're measured, people, we try not to judge others, but it's natural, it's a survival mechanism. And there are some people that you will not be able to reach without achieving a certain level of success. You will not be able to reach them. And it's not that your goal should be to reach everybody, but people talk. You hear a lot of, usually in the religious community or whatever, they talk a lot about money's evil or whatever, and it definitely can be used for evil. But my opinion has always been that it's more of a tool. It's kind of like a shovel, right? I could do some bad stuff with a shovel. I could hit somebody with it, right? Or, whatever. There's a few more analogies there. What has working with the youth, how has that impacted you in terms of your professional life and what you want to achieve financially and professionally?
Yeah. So what was kind of interesting about, the story as I was going through as a youth pastor, music person, a lot of my quality time with my kids was through volunteering, through coaching and stuff. And I loved that. But then when I went into sales with aviation, I had to put that on the back burner. And the company was pretty, clear about that. You can't leave early to go coach your kids. And so what was interesting was that there was a shift there from being present to them, like after school and stuff, to not being present. But when I was present with them, I was present in a different way. Like, hey, we could take a trip now. Like, we can go on vacation this year because we actually have funds for it. Or when I take them to a soccer game, hey, we can actually afford a Chick-fil-A sandwich. Hey, bring your friends. Like, we can pay for your friends. And that was rewarding in its own way. And so for me, when it comes to giving back, or when it comes to quality time, when it comes to how my faith life and my working with the youth has informed me moving forward, my goal in the future, like I recently started my own brokerage. My goal is to reach out to people who were like me, that had the heart of a servant, that were hungry for success, but just never had the right vehicle. So now what it does for me is I now have a vehicle. I now have a way that I can transform my life with income. And I want to share that with other people that, most brokerages are probably looking for someone that's a pilot or has sales experience or whatever. I'm looking for the right, like the kind-hearted people that are going to work really hard, because I can teach you the soft skills on how to talk to someone and how to sell a jet so that it can transform your life. So I'm looking at it from that perspective of how can I transform someone's life, not just how can I sell more jets for myself.
You hear this analogy quite a bit. I've heard it probably 100 times in my life or more, but about how to get the most rocks. And if you have a bunch of rocks, sand, water, and you need to put in a glass jar, right? You start with the big rocks first. You start with the big rocks first, and then you can kind of fill in the gaps with the smaller rocks, and the gaps there with the pebbles, and then the gaps there with the sand, and then you top off the water. And if you do it that way, you can get the most out of the jar, right? The proverbial jar. But if you put the sand in first or the water in first, you're not going to get those big rocks. And I've seen that in my life. I have somebody that relatively close to that. He's very, very successful. But he put the water in first. And for me, my faith and my family, those are the big rocks. And what I worry about a lot of times when I'm talking to entrepreneurs, especially folks getting started, because the startup phase is such a grind, is I want to make sure that they have those big rocks in the jar first. Those things that, because the other stuff's going to come. That's what I've learned. If you get that stuff right, you don't screw that stuff up. Um, you'll be able to fit the rest. You can pave a way to success. You can figure it out. But a lot of people, Tom, they'll say, no, this is like, it has to be my life for a decade, or this is all that matters. I'm not saying that they don't have a initial focus isn't required, because it is. But it's so important, because people will say, hey, um, a lot of times they'll say, hey, I don't have anything to give, but once I do, I will. And then once they do, they don't. It's like you have to figure out how to give of your time and money before you have it. That's when it's, interestingly enough, that's when it's the easiest. And you develop these patterns. But that's kind of interesting, path that you've taken. It's, I think it's really cool because you have this perspective. I experience a lot of guilt. I got married later. I didn't have my first son until after I graduated from law school, and things were pretty tight back then, but it was never, like some of the stories that I hear with people really struggling. But your perspective is very refreshing, because you're thankful with the situation that you're in now, that you can go to Chick-fil-A and take some of your kids' buddies with you. And one thing that I'm worried about is making sure that I pass it on to my kids. Like, how do I pass this on to my kids when I definitely didn't grow up as my kids are growing up? Have you come across that at all? Have you ever had thoughts about, hey, how do I instill this attitude of gratitude and, thankfulness in my children?
Well, I think it's been kind of an interesting journey for our kids, because my son, who's 13, he started out with us where, when we first got married, we lived on the same property as my parents in like their guest house. So like we were always there. And, he's experienced, like, grandma was always helping us. He experienced paycheck to paycheck. He experienced not being able to go to Chick-fil-A. So he kind of grew up with that. Now there was kind of an opening. We had a couple cool opportunities, for the past couple of years while I was working with the brokerage, and my income just, kept increasing, doubling year over year. And what's interesting is now that I've gone out on my own, like, there's a big scale back. So we're kind of like going back to like, okay, like, how do we balance between, growing something and the lifestyle that we were getting accustomed to the last 3 years. So I think for the older half of the kids, the first three, they kind of experienced a little bit of what it used to be like, and then they came out of it, and now we're kind of going back. So I think they're going to have a good perspective of it. And what I'm kind of excited about is that challenge that you're talking about, for the younger ones, because I see this as just like the start, and it's only going to get, better moving forward.
There's this balance between, I think with kids especially, where it's like you want to show them what's possible. I grew up in a small farming community on the Oregon-Idaho border, and I was just there this past weekend, actually. We go back quite a bit for a couple of reasons, spend our summers there. But in the town that I grew up in, and I learned a lot of really good skills. I learned how to work hard and things like that. But people rarely leave the area. They don't go see what's out there. And luckily, my mom, she wanted me to get out of the house as soon as I could and go explore the world. And so that on one hand, you want your kids to see what's possible, which is pretty much anything. They can be whatever they want to be. But on the other hand, you want to keep them grounded. And as parents, we're in a really tough situation for a lot of reasons. It's tough. Being a parent and being a husband is, those are the two of my toughest jobs, my most rewarding jobs, but two of my toughest. But it's important that we help them realize, hey, you can go conquer the world, you can, but do it in a way where you don't run over people. Don't do that, because then the reward will be empty. It will, you'll get there and you'll feel some sense of achievement, but it won't last. So, interesting conversation. I've never chatted with anybody about this. Before we move on, what are your kind of closing thoughts about being a father and working through these types of issues with your children?
Well, I would say I've got two quick stories. One, as far as like trying to show my kids how to grow in business. One of the things that cracks me up is my oldest son, who's in middle school. He has learned that if he goes to the local Publix and buys a pack of gum for like $5 of like 20 sticks, he can go to school and sell them for like $2 to $5 a piece. And so he's starting that entrepreneurial. Yeah, I know, it's crazy, but he's starting that because he's seen, I try things with them, like try that Facebook Marketplace stuff, and expose them to that kind of stuff. So I try to show them, and if they ever ask for something, it's like, yeah, what money do you have? We kind of started that early because we didn't have any money. So if you wanted something, go find a way to make it happen. And then the second one was, one day I was in the car with talking to a client of mine, and some things had gone south or whatever. And this client just went off on me, and he was on speakerphone. My son heard it, and we're sitting there, and I get it all the time. So I'm just like, okay, fine. Someone went off on me, but my son is sitting there crying with his head in his hands. And I'm like, buddy, like, it's okay. Like, don't worry about it. Like, what's wrong? He's just like, I'm just so upset that somebody was so mean, to my dad. And I'm like, I get it. I understand, dude, but like, watch me, like, watch what I'm going to do after this. Like, because that was a pivotal moment in my career, and I can't get into like the details of what that conversation was about, but that was a pivotal moment in my career where I had a choice to either back down and pretty much walk away from what I was trying to do and what I was looking to do in my career, or I could step up to the plate, take my best swing, and move forward. And that was almost a year ago or so now. And I recently went back to my son, and it's like, remember that conversation where that guy went off on me? It's like, see where we are a year later, and that's because I didn't quit. I wanted to move forward, and I'm so thankful he was in the car with me at that time, because that's just now ingrained in my brain and in my life. Like, that was a pivotal moment for us. And he was kind of the catalyst for that, because I wanted to show him, watch what's going to happen. And I guess maybe that's part of what we do as parents, is sometimes we try to shelter them from our struggles, our failures. But if they see a struggle and they can see us overcome that struggle, then they can know that they can overcome those struggles as well.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. There's so many great lessons in there. I think as business leaders, as well as parents, I believe in these ultimate principles of truth, and that's one of them, where it's like, if you want to lead somebody, don't tell them to go do it. Tell them, watch me. That sticks with people. That hits different, and the struggle component, man, I try to get, not having enough struggle for my children is one of my biggest concerns. And so I'm always looking for ways that I can struggle in front of them. And I've recently started, over the last month or two, jumping in really cold water, really uncomfortable, like, doing the cold plunges and stuff. And because our kids don't see that, right? I've been blessed in a lot of ways with my businesses, financially. I have a couple of decent vehicles and things like that, and that's what my kids see. They see the cars or whatever. They don't see the struggle that went into it. They don't see the people that quit on me. They don't see the people that yelled at me, like the customers and all that. So I think that, man, that's such a cool story. And the funny thing is that nothing could teach your son that lesson like that.
Right. Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's the real world stuff for sure.
I am interested in hearing about the aviation side of your career. I'm especially interested in hearing about how people can monetize owning airplanes, jets, whatever, when they're not using them, and Tell me about that. That's very interesting.
Yeah, so in aviation, there's a couple of different ways to make money. You can become a broker. The interesting thing about becoming a broker is there's no license, no certifications. Like you just kind of start, you kind of get yourself going. Like I was a youth pastor beforehand. So, for those people that might be listening to your show, that are like, what do I do? I like planes, but like, how can I make money with aviation? Well, being a broker is one way that you could do that, and it's the sales skills that you talk about, it's the marketing skills that you talk about on your podcast, and you can grow your own business from that perspective of just listing, selling planes, kind of like a realtor, but with airplanes or private jets. And you can do both. You can do everything. So, I mean, that might be one way that your audience would be interested in. And then, of course, if you're at the end of the spectrum where you're looking to invest, basically what you do is you buy a jet and you hand it off to a charter company to rent it out and work it out, and they will pay you back the revenue. It's basically like realty. It's like Airbnb, right? And you hand over the asset to a management company that will handle getting the clients and generating income from that specific asset. There's a lot to it, obviously, and a lot of things that I wouldn't advise it for everybody. There's some things to be aware of, but more and more people are becoming excited about private aviation. I watched a couple of videos from Chris Korn and Nick Marietta and other people like that they're like, I'm more excited about private aviation than I am about real estate right now because of, what they're seeing in the market.
That's interesting. So it's kind of like buying a piece of property, handing it over to a property management company, crossing off some dates or whatever, where it's like, hey, I'm going to be using it on these dates and fill it up. What type of fee would somebody be looking at to use? So is that what you do as a broker? Tell me a little bit about what it means to be a broker, or are you involved in the transaction of buy sell?
So I primarily do the buy sell. The investing part is kind of a newer service that we've been offering. So, I will work as an acquisition broker, but now because I've been making the connections with the operators and explaining the opportunity to people, now people are hiring me to be their acquisition broker to buy a jet, but also take them through the process of setting up that they can buy a jet and make an investment of it. I mean, and it's a very long sales cycle. We're talking 9 months to a year from, someone talking with someone and then finding the right operator, finding the right jet, and then actually buying the jet. So to your original question of like how it works, you basically need capital up front to buy the jet, and the jet that we're looking at is going to be probably $2 million or more, all the way up to like a Gulfstream that's 10, 20, whatever $1 million. So you're going to at least need a $2 million to kind of get into the game. So it's got high acquisition costs, and then from there, when you hand it over to the management company, they'll charge a fee. It could be a couple $1,000s a month to manage it. And then on top of that, they will rent it out by the hour. And so if it costs you, let's say $3,500 to operate the jet, they will charge, let's say $5,500 an hour to the retail, person to use it. And they'll usually take a percentage, like 15% of that $2,000 per hour margin, or they'll take a flat rate. Maybe it's $1,500 of that, or not 1,500, but a flat rate of that $2,000 per hour. And that's how they make their money.
Yeah, that's interesting. Are you seeing people that get into aviation for the first time going straight to that type of model? Or is this usually people that, they've had a private jet for a while for their own purposes, they decide to do it?
Well, surprisingly enough, a lot of them are first time aviators because the part of the key is that you're not going to use the jet for yourself. So you really don't want someone that's already using their jet for 100, 200 hours a year, because then it doesn't give the charter company enough time to make money and make revenue. It's like buying a vacation house that you're going to use 3 months, 4 months out of the year in the summer in times of peak, where you would want to sell it. So it's usually either first time operators or operators that want to buy another jet in their portfolio and hand it over to an operating company. Oh, and the other thing I forgot to mention was one of the reasons why people do it is because of the depreciation. So last year you could actually depreciate 100% of your purchase. So if you bought a $4 million jet, boom, $4 million in that year was done. Now it's down to 80% and it's going to phase itself out. But the accelerated depreciation that was applied to private jets was a huge a boost for the past couple of years.
That's awesome, man. That's very cool. I definitely have some more questions that I'd like to ask you once we pause the recording, but that's fantastic. This has been great, man. This has been a really cool conversation, very applicable. Just people, a lot of my listeners they're looking to get to the next level, and sometimes the more practical aspect of doing that is what's important and maybe holding them back. So this conversation has been great. People have questions for you or they want to reach out. What's the best way for them to contact you?
Just go to theultimatejetguide.com. All my social media handles are on there for Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, YouTube. So theultimatejetguide.com is where you want to go.
Love it. Well, thanks for joining us today, Tom. I appreciate all the great info and best of luck, man.
Thanks, Allan. Appreciate it.